This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you. My name is Elizabeth Danbury, and I am the current chairman of the London Paleography Teachers Group, and it's on their behalf that it's a great pleasure to welcome you to, let me get my title right, the 2015 University of London John Coffin Memorial Lecture on Paleography. We're delighted, very delighted, that this year's lecture will be given by Professor Nicholas Vincent, who is Professor at the University of East Anglia and probably one of the world's leading authorities on Magna Carta. Indeed, this year, he will be lecturing not only the length and breadth of Great Britain, but all over the continents, everywhere, with the possible exception of Antarctica. Professor Vincent has chosen as the title of his lecture, Who Wrote Magna Carta? And it is now my pleasure to ask him to give the 2015 Annual Lecture on Paleography. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who agrees to give something called the Coffin Lecture on the 13th of the month deserves everything that is coming their way. But we are all very grateful to this bequest from John Coffin's family that pays for this lecture, and I think it would be appropriate for me to begin by thanking the Coffin family for having endowed what is about to occur. And as Elizabeth said also, I don't think I have been invited as yet by Antarctica, but if there are any penguins around, I'm sure they're just ready and waiting. I should also say that I am an utter fraud in giving a lecture on paleography, because I am many things but not a paleographer. And I realise that there are people in this audience today who are, and to them I apologise unreservedly in advance of what I'm about to say. I should also say that the closest of my colleagues who works on paleography, Tessa Webber, is with us, and I have checked that I am not going to say anything too outrageous to terrify the penguins over the course of the next 50 minutes. Now, we all know who wrote Magna Carta, and I should of course say that this is the 800th anniversary of this great document. We all know who wrote Magna Carta. It was King John, as you can see from this 19th century engraving. And those of you who are sitting far back, although you may all be Anglicans, I would suggest that you move forward and stay in the body of the congregation, because you're going to find quite a lot of these pictures difficult to see from far away. The Royal Mint, of course, realising that King John wrote Magna Carta, produced this magnificent anniversary coin, in which King John is shown rather too happily, I think, holding Magna Carta in one hand, or at least a scroll in one hand, and a pen in the other. Being a very literal people, the Americans got this right a long time ago, so that when the great bronze doors of the Supreme Court in Washington were built in the 1930s, they showed King John with a seal press rather than a pen. And you can see him there, a bit like one of those immigration officers when you arrive at JFK, stamping the passport of the barons. Now, I'm not going to deal today with the much broader intellectual question of who wrote the text of Magna Carta. That is a much broader theme, which David Davray and others in this room have touched on. And here I think that we do need to bear in mind the presence at Runnymede not only of the king and his courtiers and his lawyers, but the bishops. And a great building like Salisbury Cathedral is in many ways a stone embodiment of various of the principles in Magna Carta, not least Magna Carta Clause 1, the division of Regnum from Sacerdotium. Lincoln Cathedral, which houses another of the originals of Magna Carta, likewise can serve as a great sermon in stone of the mutual obligations, the ideas of a community of the faithful that are so significant in Magna Carta, particularly perhaps in Magna Carta Clause 62, where the rights granted to the barons are extended by the king to everybody, barons and beyond. The very movement of Salisbury, only a few years after Magna Carta, from its hill at Old Sarum down the road to Salisbury, is a metaphor for that theme. I'm not sure who this chap is, he may well be in the audience this evening, I don't know this gentleman, but there he is standing in Salisbury Cathedral Library. And as Tessa Weber and others have shown, in the 12th century, Salisbury itself was a very lively centre of intellectual pursuit of the Bible, of history, and of other themes that crop up in the writing of Magna Carta. The same would be very true of Lincoln Cathedral, which at this time had a significant school, and I have elsewhere commented on the direct connection between the commentaries on the Bible of Ralph Niger and the thought world of Stephen Langton, from which that typology of the Old Testament kings as models of everything that is either alternatively good or bad about modern kingship derives. These are not themes that I intend to deal with here. I will, however, draw attention once again to one theme that came to me from that great source of all modern knowledge, Wikipedia. I was asked a few years ago by a student, why are there 25 barons in Magna Carta? So I went to Wikipedia for the answer. Now, Wikipedia didn't actually tell me the answer directly, but it did lead me to that answer via the thought world of Stephen Langton. Here's Langton's seal, here's Langton's counter-seal showing the murder of Thomas Becket. This is a world in which the murder of Becket is still very prominent in people's minds. And if anyone at Runnymede knew the text of Augustine on St. John's Gospel, chapter 25, verse 6, where Christ went out walking on the sea, and Augustine comments on this and explains that 25 is the number of the law, then that person was Stephen Langton at Runnymede in 1215. What Augustine says here is that 25 is the number of the law because it is the number of the books in the Pentateuch, the number of the books of law in the Old Testament squared. And if one were looking for the reason why we have 25 rather than 23 or 19 or 27 barons, I think we need look no further than that. I'm going to deal, though, today not with that intellectual world, but with the much cruder physical world of the writing of the Charter at Runnymede. And here you know that there are 4 surviving originals of the 1215 Magna Carta. They're all now granted UNESCO World Heritage status. I think over the objections of Richard Sharp, who somewhere or another objected to the idea that these should actually come under the auspices of UNESCO. But anyway, we have the Charter at Lincoln, we have the Charter at Salisbury, and we have the 2 British Library Charters, the unburnt Coffin Charter, with a series of clauses written at the bottom of it, very interestingly, and the burnt Coffin Charter, to which I will return in due course. All 4 of those I shall return to. And we have, although the Coffin Charter is burned, the pine engraving that was made shortly after the Coffin fire, but shows that even after the Coffin Library was burned, a great deal more of the Charter survived than survives today. Today, what you see is the result of an appalling attempt at restoration in the 1820s using a mixture of wine and honey. Now, I came to this really not in any sense as a paleographer, but because when Sotheby's came to sell the Ross Perot Magna Carta in 2007, I was called in to write the catalogue. And the Ross Perot Charter, as you probably know, sold to this gentleman, Mr. David Rubenstein, for $21.3 million, of which I saw not a fraction. Now, it very soon became apparent to me in writing that catalogue at very great haste that the state of play in respect to the originals of Magna Carta had changed virtually not at all since the days of William Blackstone. In 1759, Blackstone published his great commentary on Magna Carta, including his first proper division of the text of the 1225 Charter from the text of the 1215 Charter. And in the course of that inquiry, Blackstone did draw up a census of Magna Carta manuscripts. It's Blackstone's listing of the originals and the early copies of the 1215 Magna Carta, and indeed of the subsequent reissues of Magna Carta, 1216, 1217, 1225, 1297, 1300, that informed the listing of those manuscripts 70 years later in the Statutes of the Realm of 1815. And the record commissioners who drew up the statutes of the realm really found very little that was not already known to Blackstone. Now, all of that meant that the physicality of Magna Carta, a theme which one would have thought had been touched upon a long time ago and definitively dealt with, had really not been looked at since the 1750s, since when a very great deal has changed. And indeed, despite the fact that Blackstone listed some 10 copies of Magna Carta from 1215 onwards, it's possible now to draw attention to 24 of them. And even fewer of the forest charters that accompany Magna Carta were listed by Blackstone than survive today. In the course of writing that catalogue, I was able to discover a whole series of stories about the physical keeping of Magna Carta. One of them, in the way of the press, and I did ask earlier on whether anyone from the press is here, and I'm told they aren't, so I can be as rude as I like. What the press does on the whole is pick up stories from about 10 years ago and reuse them. So what happened here was that in 2007, we were able to tell the story of Winston Churchill's attempts to gift Magna Carta to America. In 1939, the Lincoln Magna Carta was sent off to the New York World's Fair and was there at the outbreak of war in September 1939. It was used thereafter, and indeed was sent in the first place as a propaganda exercise to attempt to bring the Americans in on the side of the British people against the Germans in the Second World War. And in 1941, at the height of Britain's isolation, Winston Churchill was party to a proposal, all fully written up in the National Archives, to bring before Cabinet a proposal to gift the Lincoln Magna Carta to the American people. It was a wonderful idea, and it was also utterly impractical because Winston Churchill and the Cabinet did not own the Lincoln Magna Carta. And when the Dean and Chapter of Lincoln found out what was going on, they were not best pleased. And here is the Lincoln Magna Carta returning to the proper custody of something which looks to me as if it has been staged out of one of those Quatermass films. We can rebuild it, Dr. Quatermass. I was also able, in all of that, to tell the even more alarming story of what happened thereafter. The Lincoln Magna Carta in the early 1950s, having returned from America, was sent off to be restored in the National Archives, in what was then the Public Record Office. And we have this wonderfully mendacious letter from Sir Hilary Jenkinson to the Bishop of Lincoln, announcing in 1950 that during the course of this restoration, indubitable and regrettable damage has been done to the document. And here we really are in the world of Robert Armstrong and Economy with the Truth, due to internal deterioration from some organic cause. For example, a fungoid affection which might have developed in the long period during which it was, as I understand, immured between sheets of glass. What Jenkinson does not tell us there is that the standard procedure for preserving documents in 1950 involved dampening them with a sponge. And what actually happened here was that the lowly official entrusted with this leant too hard on the sponge and rubbed off quite a lot of the writing. And this is all now becoming apparent because we have actually discovered the photograph that was taken in 1950 before, and this is after. And one can see the rather more than fungoid damage that was caused. Now, the consequence of all of that was that it became apparent to me in 2007 that precisely because Magna Carta was in plain view, very little work had actually been done on the physical nature of the document, upon its custody, upon its later custody, or indeed in terms of collecting a proper census of the number of manuscripts, the number of copies of the Charter, the number of originals. Precisely because it is in plain view, like that wonderful Edgar Allan Poe story, in which if you want to hide something, you hide it in plain view on the mantelpiece, because that's the last the last place that anyone will look. Think of Sir James Savile and weep. You hide in plain view that which you do not really wish to be seen. And as a result of all of that, we put together a project which involves a number of partners with the University of East Anglia, and there are several of the project members here this evening, including Sophie Anglia and Tessa Weber and David Crook. We put together a project for AHRC funding towards the celebration of the 800th anniversary this year. And in the consequence of that, we staged a major exhibition in the British Library that was opened a month or so ago by Prince Charles, who gave a very good speech announcing that in that damp meadow at Runnymede, he said, "A flame was lit that burns still." Who actually wrote that speech is an interesting question, to which I will return in due course. But nonetheless, I think it's rather wonderful that royalty should be involved in the celebration of a document that was hardly very royal at the time of its issue. And it's one of the wonderful ambivalences of Magna Carta, that it can now be seen as encompassing all those traditions, all of that heritage in which Charles and his family play so large a part, not merely as a radical statement of the rights of the people against the crown. In the course of that exhibition, Charles was shown around by Claire Bray, who is another member of our team. She's looking really quite nervous there, because she's showing Charles, he's got his tongue in his cheek because he's looking at this. This is King John's teeth and part of his thumb bone that clearly played a major role in the writing of Magna Carta. Because at Runnymede, as we all know, he must have pressed down with his thumb as he used his park pen and ground his teeth. The point there really that returns us from the rather highfalutin world of the intellectual input into Magna Carta into the much more practical world of the physicality of the document, who wrote it. Now, our project has several strands, and you can see this week by week. It's still appearing week by week online. And you go just to Magna Carta Research, you type that in as one term, and you'll arrive there very quickly. Part of that project is Henry Summerson's entirely new commentary, clause by clause, on the 1215 Charter. No attempt to clause by clause commentary has been made since McKechnie in 1915. There is an incredibly dull, I know it's very dull because I write it week by week and it is increasingly a doomsday machine that swallows my life. There is King John's diary and itinerary, which enables us to follow him day by day as he does a number of dull or not so dull things. And that's accompanied by a whole series of features of the month which deal with particular incidents of significance in the emergence of Magna Carta. There's also a schools program, which is run by Louise Wilkinson, with a whole series of items for teaching Magna Carta in the classroom. And then finally, there's this bit, which is the bit that I'm going to deal with now, the charters of King John, an attempt to assemble not only the original charters of King John, and as we'll see, there are over 230 of them, in order to work out some interesting questions about Magna Carta, but also to look at those years for which the Chancery rolls no longer survive, where we can actually reassemble the Charter roll, at least, using the copies that survive in Cartularies and elsewhere, scattered across the known world. And this, of course, takes us to the precise physicality of the documents issued by King John under John's Great Seal. That's a typical example of such a charter. Very much as a publicity stunt, about a month ago, we brought together the 4 originals of the 1215 Charter. And that was done to garner the attention of the press, which it did. And it pleased our sponsors, and it also pleased the deans and chapters of Salisbury and Lincoln, though there was some question as to whether Lincoln begins with an L and therefore goes before Salisbury, or Salisbury begins with an S and therefore goes before Lincoln. And you can see that myself and Tessa and David Carpenter, with the 4 original Magna Cartas that had not been brought together, indeed may never have been together, since 1215. I would draw your attention to one rather alarming feature there. If you look on the left, you will see the Quatermass incident where the Lincoln Magna Carta was returned to Lincoln in 1947. And there is a very David Carpenter-like looking character on the left-hand side, who is still there in 2014. Now explain that if you can. Now, those of you who are interested in such things will know already that David himself has shown in the last 6 months that the burnt Coffin Charter, far from coming from Dover Castle, came from Canterbury Cathedral. We can now call it the Canterbury Charter, We know that because it is identical, the text, which would vary from one copy to another, the text is identical to the copy of the text that was copied into the principal cartulary, Register E of Canterbury Cathedral. The unburnt Coffin Charter remains something of a mystery. We do not know precisely where it came from, and any guess to that effect, and there is a guess put up there, is a guess. It is pure speculation. However, bringing those charters together did enable us to look at the back of the document in proper detail, and there is an endorsement on the back, Magna Carta Anglia, which one day will match up to the endorsements on documents from elsewhere and will enable us to tell from which precise archive this document came. Now you will tell from the very guarded terms that I am employing now that I am beginning to enter the world of the paleographers, that world where our almost instincts are almost true, to paraphrase Larkin. And I am going to be very cautious in attributions and so forth from now on. But let's throw caution to the wind in one respect. That unburnt Coffin Charter was shown under spectrographic analysis, and normally it's seen in the Ripley Gallery in the British Library only under subdued lighting. If you look at it under proper light, you can see that down the left-hand side of it, a whole series of words appear. Now those words are written in a hand of the late 14th or 15th centuries, let's say somewhere from about 1380 onwards. And even in the 1380s or 90s, one has to think that they were written by someone of significance. You cannot today go into the British Library and ask whether you can write on the front of one of their Magna Cartas, and nor, I suspect, could you in the 1390s. The terms that appear down the left-hand margin are very dull. They say things like de ecclesia, de baronials. They're just very simple attempts to devise chapter headings. However, they do ring a bell with the fact that copies of the 1215 Magna Carta begin to appear in the 1380s and 90s within a very particular context. One of them popped up in January this year in Register A of Gloucester Cathedral from around 1390. And again, if you look at the rubric to that charter, Carta Johannis Regis de Libertatibus Angliae et de Viginti Quinque Baronials, you will see that the particular interest in the 1380s and 90s in Magna Carta focused on the 25 barons. The reason for that is clear enough, that the Duke of Gloucester and indeed the baronage in the 1380s and 90s, the Lords Appellant, were very concerned with the nature of Magna Carta as a precedent for what they were doing with Richard II. But to that extent, that publicity stunt to bring the four charters together did produce something of interest, a connection here to the world of Richard II and to the afterlife of Magna Carta in the later Middle Ages. Now, a very large part of what's turned up over the last 3 years is, unlike that, entirely new. 2 years ago, in a very wet winter evening in November 2013, I was going through some very dull copies in Lambeth, all of which are catalogued by M.R. Jones. Now you have to think here of Monty Jones back in the 1920s. He was Provost of Eton. He used to go up to Lambeth, make his manuscript listings, and then go home, presumably on the 413, or whatever train it was he caught to Slough and points beyond. And I think what happened here is that at some point on the afternoon, he decided that he'd go home early for tea, because his listing of Lambeth MS 1213 tells us everything that we need to know about it, except for the fact that it contains an entirely unknown letter of the baronial 25. It's not only an entirely unknown letter of the baronial 25, it's a very significant letter whose existence has been guessed at in the past, which has been considered essential to the making of Magna Carta, but which before November 2013 was unknown, though Montague Rhodes James did indeed see it in the 1920s. He describes what was on the back of the folio, he describes what was on each folio either side of it, but either because his thumb stuck somewhere when he turned the page, or because he was rushing to catch a train, he did not bother to notice this. is the publication schedule for Magna Carta in the county courts in the summer of 1215. It comes from the end of the month. It's addressed in the name of 12 of the 25 barons of Magna Carta, and it is a document of very great significance that is entirely unknown. A document that got a lot more publicity turned up in December this year when I was in Belfast giving a lecture to the Belfast Festival of Human Rights. And there, very late at night, there isn't a great deal to do, at least if you are not given to sectarian violence. I do apologise if there are any people from Belfast here, but there isn't that much to do in Belfast late at night. So I trawled the internet, and I knew that I was going down to Maidstone to the Comparative office in a few days' time. I thought I'd go online and see what there was. And I looked and I tried, you know, those difficult searches that one does online, Magna Carta, King John, you know, it's as easy as that. And what popped up was not a Magna Carta, but a Forest Charter. It told me that there was a sandwich copy of the Forest Charter of 1300 with a question mark. So I phoned up Mark Bateson, the archivist I know best in Maidstone, and he went the following day and looked in the box where this thing was supposed to be and said, yeah, there is a Forest Charter of 1300, it's quite nice. There's also a Magna Carta next to it. And this is the Sandwich Magna Carta. This is the only Magna Carta to have been discovered this century. It's the only Magna Carta to have turned up in the last 100 years. You can see it's not in a very good state, and we won't go into the details of what precisely may have happened to it, save obviously that it's been eaten by rats and mice down the middle of it. But that got an awful lot of attention, press attention around the world. It was a very positive story for Sandwich, for me, for Mark Bateson, for Maidstone Archives, for Sandwich, for people at Kent, for the world and everybody else, except for my own university, who disciplined me because I had not gone through the university press office. I was told that I had destroyed their links to the newspapers, which they mean the East Durham Press, the Premier Gazette, and those other great organs that they used to broadcast good news from my university. Now, I read recently a fascinating book called The Poetess and the Murderer, about another discoverer of manuscripts in the 1980s, who went around, he's an American, he was a Mormon, I've forgotten his name exactly, Mark something or other. He went around finding incredibly important early documents concerning the Mormon Church. Now, he had the advantage over me in that he was able to forge a large number of these documents and then sell them to the Mormon elders because they concerned the dirty doings of Joseph Smith, and nobody really wanted these to appear. So he had, as it were, a captive audience until he went mad and tried to buy up the world and eventually ended up trying to kill his partner. I'm not making all of this up, but I will tell you something which I found today, which I think is of interest. I tried to put the copy of the Times from today next to this, but you can see it's real, because this is today, this afternoon, on the Pugin table in Lincoln's Inn Library. You can see a bit of that Pugin table in the background here. Now, this is a rather tedious copy of the early 17th century, which I first saw about 20 years ago, and I sent the transcript I made to Robert Patterson, who's published the charters of the Earls of Gloucester, because this particular copy of the Gloucester Earldom Charter isn't in that collection. But it was only really last night when I was going through my notes on Lincoln's Inn that I noticed really how significant this document is in the context of Magna Carta in 1216. This is an unknown letter of Isabella, Countess of Gloucester, King John's first wife, who was then married off at a vast profit to Geoffrey de Mandeville. And here she is, clearly in the period between March 1216, when her husband died, and March 1217, when William Marshal the Younger redefected from the barons to the king. Here she is, granting or re-granting an estate in Cambridgeshire to Sarah de Quincey. What matters about this document are those names in red. The names in red are the names of those of the witnesses and the participants to this charter, who are of the 25. And what this shows us, and it's followed by another even more interesting letter, because this actually has a date, the 8th of May 1216, almost a year after Runnymede. It shows us that 10 of the original 25 were still working together in London after Louis's invasion of England, long after Magna Carta. We've got 10 of the 25 barons of Magna Carta working still in close cooperation with one another. Now that does push forward by a very long way, by 6 months or so, our understanding of when the Committee of the 25 continued to operate. The general assumption is that it fell apart, perhaps even as early as Christmas 1215. And that, as I say, came out only this afternoon. Now at the same time as, well, I don't know whether that is David Carpenter any longer, but whoever that is on the right, and Tessa and myself, brought together those 4 Magna Cartas. Tessa and I were able to look at 225, not Magna Carta, but charters of King John. Here we are in Tessa's room, and Tessa will bear me out here. We weren't able to put them all out on the table because they just take up too much space. And we're looking rather worried then because we realised quite what a task we've taken on. Now what follows is very, very provisional. And if you want the proper story here, then listen to a proper paleographer, Tessa, who's going to talk about this at our conference, our big Magna Carta conference in London from the 17th to the 19th of June. I've done the donkey work of collecting these things. Tessa gets to have the long lunches in Trinity. I am out on the road in Bradford and Wakefield and those other places on a wet Thursday night in December. And you can see there a list of the, whatever it is, 200 and so forth archives, of which about 90 or so produce charters of King John. They're the archives on the right. Now, that distribution of charters is very much what we'd expect in terms of number. I've already done this for Henry II, and for Henry II we get about 550 original charters. For John we get about half that number. Well, that makes sense. It is a slight increase because although John reigned for slightly less than half the length of Henry II's reign, Henry II ruled over France, and in France, originals are far more likely to survive than they are in England. So there is a preponderance of originals surviving in French archives in Henry II's collection, whereas John lost France in 1204. There are problems with those totals because they are unevenly distributed across the course of the reign. One of the wonders of PowerPoint that I can show you this thing. On the left-hand side, you can see 1199, the first year of the reign. An enormous number of charters were confirmed in the opening year of each successive king. So there is a great preponderance towards the early years of the reign. Notice that it trails off almost entirely during the years of the interdict. That is interesting because it suggests not only do the Chancery rolls disappear for that period, but that there was actually a physical decrease in the number of documents issued, certainly in the number of documents preserved. And then there's a sort of spurt towards the end of the reign, but a large part of that spurt in 1215 is actually made up of the relics of Magna Carta, the 4 originals, the articles of the barons, the letters patent and so forth, that concern the issue of Magna Carta. And again, the wonders of PowerPoint, if we do that on a 3-year cycle, I'm not quite sure what that is, but it enabled me to do it, and it makes a pretty line, and I'm sure that if I were writing a treatise on paleography, I'd have a lot of these lines. It shows the progression from a large number at the beginning of the reign to a relatively modest number towards the end. 22% of the documents come from the period after 1208, from the second half of the reign. 78% of them come from the first half of the reign. In other words, there is a distinct disjunction there. Now, individually, those documents are very interesting in many cases. Beyond the routine, for example, this one. This was published a few years ago by Annual Palaeography, and it's a standard charter of King John from 1203, but it contains an extraordinary dating clause at the end, where it is dated according to the treachery, to the treason of Count Robert of Alençon. So a historical incident is taken and actually used as the basis of the dating clause of the routine royal charter. This, from Dublin, from the National Library of Ireland, is a standard charter of King John, issued on the 1st of March 1202 at Bonneville in Normandy. But if you look down at the bottom of it, and that's why I was suggesting that you come forward, because if you're sitting at the back you don't see anything of what follows, but down at the bottom we have a scrawled appendix which redates the charter at Porchester on the 27th of May 1206. Now that's a unique appearance so far as I'm concerned. I haven't seen this done before, of an attempt simply to redate a document, to reissue it by docketing it at the bottom. And the person who did that, one assumes, was a fairly substantial officer within the royal chancery. What we may see there, may even be the hand of Hugh Wells, Bishop of Lincoln, the chief chancery clerk at the time. This is a standard charter for the men of Stafford. It's a deforestation of part of the Staffordshire forest that survives in the Staffordshire Record Office. But look down at the bottom of the document, around the holes through which the seal clause passed, and you'll see that it actually contains a contemporary note of the fine that was offered for the charter, that this was fined for by 300 marks and 2 palfreys. Unfortunately, the fine roll doesn't survive for the year of this charter, so we can't absolutely match it up against the fine in the fine roll. But it's a very interesting example of the Chancery's day-to-day business suddenly appearing on the face of a document. Now, I raised that question earlier on as to who wrote King Charles. Well, he's not yet King Charles, is he? Well, we don't know that, but I'm assuming he is not yet King Charles. Prince Charles's speech at the opening of our exhibition, because one assumes that Prince Charles himself did not write it, though, as you are shortly to read in the newspapers, he does write quite a lot of other letters, which at the moment are the subject of speculation. Could King John himself write? Well, attempts in the past have been made to suggest that John was a writing and reading man. We have part of John's library. It's been suggested that this great copy of Pliny at Le Mans, for example, is a royal book. It has a massive purple and gold facing page illustration of Pliny presenting his book to the emperor, probably to Domitian. And Domitian is shown there with the shield with the lion of the Plantagenets on it. That may well be the Pliny that John owned. Again, thanks to Tessa, we've been able to look up close at this copy of Seneca in Leiden, which in some of the older literature, in R.L. Poole and so on, is described as being King John's own copy of Seneca, signed by John himself. Well, there is pencil writing, very faint at the bottom of various pages, which says Johannes de Gratia Rex Anglorum, or Anglia, but I very much doubt that that is John himself. That looks to me like someone doing a series of pen exercises, or indeed drawing parallels between Seneca on chastity and so forth, and John's own rather rocky life. We must assume that, like Prince Charles, King John relied on scribes for the writing of most of the documents that were issued in his name. And here what I'm about to tell you follows on from work I've done a long time ago, again with a great deal of assistance from Tessa, and above all with the model of T.A.N. Bishop Scriptoris Regis, published in 1961, behind us as a monument to what you can do, putting together these royal letters into their particular family packs, dividing up this great pack of 227 charters of King John, or 550, into their various rankings, the various productions of particular scribes. If we look at the Chancery of Henry II from 1154 to 1189, we find that Chancery production documents predominated. Some charters were written by unknown scribes, a very small number were written by scribes who can undoubtedly be identified as the scribes of beneficiaries, and there are a certain number of forgeries. In other words, even by the reign of Henry II, the vast majority of the king's letters were written in a professional writing office. There is one important point that I would draw to your attention, which is directly paleographical here, and it's one point that is often overlooked by those who follow Pierre Chapelet in looking at Anglo-Saxon charters. The assumption has grown up that the vast majority of Anglo-Saxon charters, and indeed early charters of kings like William I, were written by the beneficiaries, because they are not written in uniform chancery hands. But there is a problem there. If we look at the charters of Henry II, we find that all of the charters for lay beneficiaries are written by the Chancery. All of the charters for lay beneficiaries are written within the Chancery. They're written by identified scribes. Quite a lot of the charters for the great churches and abbeys are not. They fall into that purple category there of charters written by unknown scribes, or into the yellow category of charters written by local scribes. In other words, great monasteries and abbeys produced their own charters and continue to do so through to the reign of Henry II and beyond. But already by the reign of Henry II, all lay beneficiaries were in receipt of charters produced in the Chancery. Now, I hope you can see the problem that arises here when people look at the Anglo-Saxon Chancery, for which we have no royal charters issued to lay beneficiaries. If we did, if we could see the charters that were issued to Earl Godwin, or to Harold, or to whoever it might be, we might well see a far greater preponderance of Chancery production, both under Edward the Confessor and under William the Conqueror. Again, under William the Conqueror, we have no surviving originals for lay beneficiaries. In other words, the distinction between archives, paleography, and beneficiary or Chancery production there are very crucial to our understanding of the development of something called a royal chancery. Bishop as long ago as 1961, and we more recently, have shown that the vast majority of Henry II's charters were produced by a very small number of scribes. The green section there are sort of the average scribes within Chancery. There are lots of them, there are about 20 of them all told. They're Chancery scribes, we know they are because they produce documents for a variety of beneficiaries. But the vast preponderance of the King's charters were produced either by the scribe names 35, to whom we can give a name, Master Germanus, or by the scribe we know as Scribe 40. The blue and the purple scribes wrote nearly half of the surviving originals of Henry II. In other words, the Royal Writing Office, under King John's father, was staffed by two principal writers of charters and writs, with others drafted in from time to time. Now, I am not going to tell you that that is what happened under King John, because Tessa will tell us in far greater detail come June. But what we can say is that we are already beginning to identify particular scribes at work in John's Chancery. Here is a charter for the men of Nottingham, issued on the 19th of March 1200. Here is a charter for the men of Appleby, issued on the 26th of March 1200. And although Appleby is a long way from Nottingham, they are both written by the same scribe. In other words, we can indeed begin to identify specific writers in John's Chancery. Now, there are plenty of other writers. These two charters come from that same year, and they're not written by that scribe. There are plenty of other writers of documents at work in the early years of the reign. Later on, we begin to find a greater predominance by particular scribes. So, for example, we get this one, who Tessa and I have, with our customary expertise, named the roundy-handed scribe. We haven't gone for those boring numbers like Bishop. We've gone for interesting technical descriptions, the roundy hand. Well, here we are, 21st of April 1204. Here we are at Margam, not in Wilton anymore, 14th of May 1205. Here we are in Staffordshire, that one I showed you, 13th of March 1204. Here we are up north in Yorkshire on the 13th of March, and so on and so forth. These are all, and they go on, and Tessa tells me today that they go on quite a lot later than I looked at. I looked at 1204, 1205. They go on to at least 1208. There are a lot of charters written by this one scribe. And so they go on. And if we put them together, it should be pretty clear there that they are indeed written by the same person. The pose on the parchment, not necessarily the individual letter forms, but the characteristic slants, the characteristic appearance of this hand is a clear indication that this is one person writing. We can even find that scribe on a scrap of parchment like this. This comes from Berkeley Castle. The rest of this document has been eaten, if not by Lord Berkeley, then by rats and mice. But we can actually say that this is written by the same scribe. And that helps us to date it, and in turn it helps us to identify it, even from that small scrap, as a very interesting charter concerning the forgery of the King's seal, of which a copy survives on the Royal Charter Roll for Adam of Essex. Now, as I said, under Henry II, a very small number of scribes wrote the majority of the King's charters. This particular scribe, the roundy-handed scribe, has certain characteristics as early as 1204, 1205 that are pregnant with meaning later in the 13th century. So, for example, he begins to decorate the opening lettering of his charters, the Johannes there. This very much in the world that has been explored recently by Elizabeth Danbury, of those wonderful decorated charters that we come to in due course. And although this is not written by the same scribe, here we've got a scribe who decorates the Johannes at the top, but also look down at the bottom left-hand side. He's also gone wild there next to the witness list with a whole series of pen strokes. Those, I think, are contemporary decoration. I don't think that they are added later in an archive. All of that leading on in due course to a much more beautiful period, which I'm sure you wished you'd come to hear about. And Elizabeth sent me this very recently. This is a charter of Edward I for the men of Argent in southern France, in Gascony. But you can see the magnificence that this was to result in eventually with these portraits of kings. This comes from Shrewsbury and is particularly interesting because it shows a king actually granting a charter. And what he's not doing is applying the seal press or signing it. He's sort of holding it in his hand in such a way that he passes his hand over the document in order to hand it over to his queen, Anne of Bohemia. All of that really to invite the question which I use as the title of this lecture, though like many lectures I have gone astray from my original title. Who actually wrote Magna Carta? Now, to answer that question, we had to look at the originals produced in that year of Magna Carta, 1215, 1216, and I've given you a list of 17 of them. Some of those charters are written in almost indistinguishable, almost anonymized hands, what I would call writ hands, that are routine business hands used for the production of letters patent and letters close. We find that, for example, in the Hereford letters patent that Ifor Rowlands published a few years ago that is very significant for our knowledge of the publication of Magna Carta in June 1215. We find a similar hand in the will of King John, issued at the very end of his reign, now in Worcester Cathedral. If we put those two hands together, I do not have the authority of my guru to say that they are written in the same hand. But I do have the authority to say that they are written in very similar hands. Hands that would merit further exploration by an expert with greater authority or daring than myself. We must be on our guard here because, of course, we know that scribes and writing masters, as these fantastic 14th and 15th century advertisements for the work of scribes and writing masters show, were able to write in many different ways. If we saw that hand down on the bottom right-hand side, we might have grave difficulty in realizing it with the same hand that read the bit above or in the left-hand side. But this is a writing master advertising his skills. Here's another one. I can not only do tap dancing and charter hands and book hands, but I can also sing and write music. Even so, there are sufficient similarities between the script of at least 5 of those charters, 17 charters of 1215 to 1216, to suggest a degree of identity. And I'm going to go through them, as it were, from the certain to the not so certain. So if we take this one in January 1215, that is undoubtedly in the same hand as that one from later in January. And therefore different beneficiaries, clearly it is a scribe in Chancery. Look at the way that the date is posed at the bottom of the charter. That's the most obvious feature, apart from things like the initial J and so forth and the individual metaphors. But the posing of the date is very characteristic. This too is in the same hand. This is in the Shrine collection in Oslo, at least I think it is, unless they've sold it, their charters, but again from January 1215, written by the same scribe. We then get into a realm of plausibility, verging into possibility. So this from July 1215 looks as if it is in the same hand, and again notice the careful infilling at the end line of that document, as does this from August 1215 from the archives of Halesowen Abbey. Those are the 5. There's a 6th charter, a very significant charter, issued exactly 800 years ago this week to the men of London, granting the right to elect a mayor, that may be written in the same hand. This is one of those iconic Magna Carta documents of the summer of 1215, and it may be in the same hand as that principal scribe of 1215. All of that to beg the question, who actually wrote Magna Carta? Now here is the Lincoln Magna Carta. And I do apologise for the second of those slides down there, because it's got warped in the PowerPoint process. Here's the beginning of it, and here's the end. Here is a charter issued by King John to the Bishop of Lincoln on the 18th of July, 1215. Here is the beginning of Magna Carta, and underneath it, the beginning of that Lincoln Charter. And they are, Tessa, sorry, in my view, written in the same hand. The Lincoln Charter uses a very small, a very reduced lettering in order to fit the 4,000 words of Magna Carta onto the side of a medieval sheep. But although the writing is a great deal smaller in the case of Lincoln, there are a series of characteristic forms and angles and poses there that lead me, and I think probably Tessa, if she had been a little bit more adventurous, to agree that that could well be the same hand. And the same applies to the end of that charter. Very characteristically there, I think, the word septime decimo at the end. And again, that posing of the document, the posing of the final line, very skillfully posed so that the final line infills the last line of the parchment. Here's another charter of King John, issued alongside that one on the right. That's the charter of the 18th of July. But here's another charter of John to the Bishop of Lincoln, issued on the 21st of January on the left. And if we put those together, and here Tessa does agree, these are written by the same scribe. Now what that suggests very strongly is that charters issued by King John to Lincoln in 1215 are written by one scribe. And that suggests that they are actually locally produced. That should come as no great surprise, because Hugh of Lincoln, as I've shown you, was a leading official within the Royal Chancery before he became a bishop. It shows local production at Lincoln, and it means that if you looked at the Lincoln Charter, what you see is not actually, as it were, immediately a royal document. You see a Lincoln Cathedral document. That raises the question, which I do not intend to answer here today, as to whether these are actually written by one of Hugh of Lincoln's identifiable scribes. Here are charters of 1217, August 1217, September 1217, and October 1217, written by a scribe working for the Bishop of Lincoln. These are all issued in the name of Hugh of Wells, and here they are put together, those three charters. Here are the openings of all three of those charters, and above them those lines from Larkin are almost instinct, this is for you, Tessa, are almost instinct, almost true. Would one go to the guillotine in saying that they are all three written in the same hand? Would one be prepared to say that they are written in the same hand as the Royal Charters for Lincoln and Magna Carta? It is not for me to say. But there is certainly grounds there to suppose that the Lincoln Magna Carta was written by a scribe working for the bishop rather than for the king. Now we get on to boggier ground with the Salisbury Magna Carta. The Salisbury Magna Carta is written in a very distinctive hand. This is the furthest away from the Royal Chancery that we get of the four Magna Cartas. So far away, indeed, that there were questions back then, in the days of Joe Holt, as to whether the Salisbury Magna Carta was really Magna Carta at all. I've looked at a selection so far, and I haven't got the full set of the charters of Herbert Poor, Bishop of Salisbury, in 1215. And the majority of them that I've seen are either written in a very spidery hand early on in the 1190s under Herbert, and those charters that are written later, like this of February 1215, are written in a series of hands distinctive, and definitely, in my view, distinct from that of the Salisbury Magna Carta. That's a letter that survives in Westminster Abbey. That's one that Sophie photographed me yesterday in the Public Record Office. There are grounds there for saying that they may be by the same scribe, but they're definitely not the same scribe who wrote Magna Carta. I say definitely. This is paleography. We cannot say definitely. Probably. I was more excited by this charter, which turned up in the Wiltshire Record Office in Chippenham. This is a charter of Herbert Poor issued in 1214. This is not issued in the standard hand of his chancery, though it must have been issued by somebody attached to him, or at least able to present charters to the bishop for his seal. And there are certain similarities with the Salisbury Magna Carta that lead one to question, at least, whether there is grounds for investigation of that scribe. This is a charter of Stanley Abbey in Wiltshire, and it isn't even necessarily a charter produced within the Bishop's Chancery. But it does suggest that that style of handwriting would suit the place and the time, 1215, down there in Wiltshire, to suggest that the Salisbury Magna Carta is also a local production. The two British language charters are much closer to what I've called a generic writ hand of the Royal Chancery. And in both of those cases, there are strong grounds to suppose that they actually come from the Royal Chancery, not least the fact that they have those amendments, those additions or amendments, stuck down at the bottom of them. Those two are unique in terms of John's Chancery, because in theory, according to the Dialogue with the Exchequer, any mistakes or amendments in a document would rule that document null and void. So, what emerges from all of that, from this vast mountain of the John Coffin Lecture 2015? The thing that I want to leave you with is a reflection that if you saw Magna Carta in Salisbury or Lincoln in 1215, what you saw was probably the production of the Bishop of Salisbury or the Bishop of Lincoln, probably. And what you looked at would have been a document that did not look like the average run of the King's Charters. Now, I cite that really in order as a way of getting back at those who have tried to turn this year into a Toy Town celebration of a prelapsarian past in which kings and queens went around doing good deeds, and in which, as it were, freedom and liberty were there at Runnymede in 1215. I could describe that as the American view of Magna Carta. And I would leave you with this reflection, that if you saw the Salisbury or Lincoln Magna Carta in 1215, what you saw was in many ways equivalent to turning on the radio today and hearing the election results preceded by plain chant, and should remind us that Magna Carta, from the world of the bishops, both intellectually and, as I hope I've shown you, scribally, comes from a culture of the church that makes it much closer in reality to that world of Sharia law, to that world in which regnum and sacerdotium are almost indistinguishable, that we are told today we are fighting an undying war against as part of our so-called war on terror. So, the foundation document of English liberty is itself a product of a system that today we would be using drones and missiles to destroy. Some at least of that you will see if you go to our exhibition in the British Library. Some of it you'll see if you go on our website, Magna Carta Research, and a lot more of it in a lot greater detail, and there are at least a dozen people in this room who will be speaking at this conference in June. You can hear, if you come to our conference between the 17th